When my brother lost everything, I was the only one who helped him. After he turned his life around, he started treating me like I was nothing. By the time my brother's girlfriend smiled over the cake and implied my work was basically me talking into a closet for grocery money, I had already spent the afternoon gluing paper stars to the wall for my daughter's kindergarten project and recording a fake, cheerful phone prompt for a dentist office that still owed me half the invoice. So no, I wasn't exactly in the mood for family comedy night. My name is Nadine, and if you met me then, you probably would have thought I had things sort of under control. Not glamorous, not impressive, but controlled in that very American way where your rent is paid, your car starts most mornings, your kid has lunch packed, and you cry only in private locations like parking lots and laundry rooms. I made a living doing voice work for local ads, training videos, phone systems, radio spots, all the unsexy little audio jobs nobody thinks about until the voice on the line tells them to press 1 for billing. I worked from a tiny room in my apartment with foam squares on the wall and a blanket clipped over a shelf because sound treatment is expensive and I like electricity too much to stop paying for it. My daughter was 5 then, all skinny legs and missing patience, and I'd adopted her as a baby after fostering her for almost a year. That decision had never been a quiet one in my family. My mother acted like I had brought home a moral debate instead of a child. My father never came right out and said he disapproved, but he had a whole style of silence that managed to say plenty. My younger brother, though, loved her from the start. He used to sit on my kitchen floor and let her put plastic barrettes in his hair while asking me about jobs and girlfriends and taxes and how to write an email that sounded professional without sounding weird. He was the one person in my family who could still make me soften when I was already halfway to a grudge. That was probably why I kept swallowing things I should have spat back out. At my parents' house that night, the table was full of the usual cheap paper plates, overcooked chicken, and tension disguised as small talk. My brother had brought the woman he was seeing, the one he met in a business program, and talked about like she had descended from the sky holding a planner and a future. She was polished in a way that made the rest of us look thumbprinted. Hair smooth, nails done, voice crisp, eyes always scanning the room like she was ranking furniture. She asked me about work, and I answered the way I always did, because if you freelance long enough, you learn to speak about your job with the confidence of someone who isn't tired of defending it. I said I had a steady list of clients. I worked from home. I liked the flexibility because of my daughter. And then she smiled that thin smile and said, "Loud enough for everybody." That kind of thing is fine when it's just you, I guess. But unstable work gets risky when real people depend on you. Real people. As if the child who called me mom and slept with one sock on because she hated matching sensations was some decorative side project. I actually laughed at first because sometimes your brain protects you by assuming surely nobody just said what they said. My brother looked down at his plate. My mother did that fake hostess chuckle and told everyone to calm down because no one meant anything. My father said families shouldn't fight over opinions. Opinions, right. I felt heat shoot up my neck, and for a second I wanted to say something mean and accurate, which is my spiritual gift. Instead, I took a sip of flat soda and asked if anyone wanted more cake. Later, after I'd loaded my sleepy kid into her car seat and texted a client about a revised script, my brother called me crying, full-on crying, said she was under stress, said she came from a family that judged unstable careers, said he knew what she said was out of line, said please don't hold it against him because he loved me and he hated being stuck in the middle. I wish I could tell you I gave some wise speech about boundaries. I didn't. I stood by the gas pump in my work sneakers and told him it was fine even though it wasn't, because he was my little brother and because he sounded scared that love might cost him something. That was our family pattern in one scene, honestly. Someone would say something ugly, someone else would cry, and suddenly the ugliest person in the room would somehow need the most comfort. Things got worse in boring, believable ways, which is how most family damage works. There was no dramatic villain music, just a steady drip of comments that left me damp and furious. Over the next year or so, while they dated and posted their polished little milestones on a social media app and brought expensive appetizers to holidays they absolutely could not afford, she kept finding ways to remind me that in her mind I was temporary. Not a bad person exactly, just a cautionary tale in soft pants. At a summer cookout in my parents' yard, while my daughter chased bubbles with one shoe missing, she asked me in front of everybody when I planned to give her real stability. I said she had real stability. She had a home, health coverage through the state program I fought tooth and nail to keep updated, bedtime stories, routine, school registration completed on time, and a mother who knew every nightmare by theme. She tilted her head and said children do better with structure, by which she meant a man. She never said it plain at first. She liked her cruelty with a lace edge. My brother stared into his drink and mumbled something about people having different paths. My mother jumped in to ask whether anyone wanted more corn. That was another family specialty, by the way. Emotional arson followed by side dishes. They got married when they were both still in that age where people think matching wedding party robes are a personality. The ceremony was bigger than their budget and longer than my daughter's patience. She was 6 and trying hard, which made it worse to watch. She spilled juice at the reception. Not a whole tray, not a scene, just one cup tipping over because somebody had wedged her chair too close to a table leg. My sister-in-law looked at the stain on the tablecloth like my child had spray-painted an insult across the wall and muttered that some kids weren't taught how to behave at formal events. I heard it. She knew I heard it. My brother heard it too, and he did what he always did when the truth made him uncomfortable. He acted very busy. I kept going because life didn't pause for emotional humiliation. I recorded a series of training modules for a hardware supplier. I booked a local tourism campaign. I fought with my landlord about a broken vent. My daughter lost a front tooth and decided this meant she now looked more like a shark, which she considered flattering. My brother kept calling privately for advice about money and job interviews and whether he and his wife were ready to buy a better car. He still wanted my opinion when he needed grounding. He just didn't want to be seen agreeing with me in public. Then they had what they called their bold season, which is the kind of phrase people use right before they do something expensive and dumb. 2 years into the marriage, they announced they were quitting their jobs to start an event supply business. Nothing enormous, just a local company renting decor pieces, party backdrops, folding furniture, all the polished stuff people want for showers and brand launches and birthday dinners they can't really afford but want photographed anyway. My brother called me late one night and asked what I really thought. I said, did he want the loving answer or the useful one? He said both. So I told him. I said startup costs would chew through them faster than they expected. I said inconsistent bookings could sink them before repeat business had time to grow. I said storage, rent, transport, damage, insurance, all of it adds up even when business is decent. And they didn't have the cushion they were pretending to have. He got quiet. Then he thanked me. Then, 2 days later, his wife told me at my parents' house that creative people usually panic around practical business decisions because they're not used to the real world. I asked if she meant the real world where people pay invoices late, or the real world where adults insult the person they're asking for free advice. She gave me that smile again, the one that made me want to throw a dinner roll at her forehead. My mother hissed my name like I was the embarrassing one. My brother texted me later that I should try to understand how stressed she was. Imagine being told to understand the stress of someone who keeps stepping on your neck and calling it concern. They moved forward anyway. Security deposit on a commercial space. Used inventory. Financing through savings, credit cards, optimism, and lies they told themselves in the mirror. I offered to connect them with a couple of small production contacts I knew through voiceover work because marketing teams overlap with event people more than you'd think. She said they had their own network. A month later, my brother called me from the parking lot outside their space and admitted he was terrified. He said the promised contracts from college friends hadn't turned into signed jobs. He said they had 2 small bookings and a lot of empty calendar. I told him fear wasn't an omen. It was just fear. I also told him fear plus debt plus pride is a nasty mix. He laughed in this cracked little way and said she still believed completely. That was supposed to comfort him. Mostly, it made me cold. The business lasted 5 months, which was longer than I expected and shorter than they needed. At first, they kept performing success. My brother posted careful little photos of stacked inventory, mood boards, van doors open at dawn, captions about building dreams and trusting the process. In real life, they were taking any job that came through, even the small ones that barely covered fuel. A baby shower in a church hall. A retirement lunch with 2 balloon stands and rented chairs. A boutique opening where the owner paid them late and complained anyway. My brother would call me on his drive home sounding cheerful in a way that made me tired just listening to it. It wasn't happiness, it was panic in a suit. By the 3rd month, the edges started showing. Their main prospective client for the season backed out because of budget shifts, which is business language for we found somebody cheaper or we changed our minds. The landlord on the commercial space started sending warnings about overdue rent. They used credit cards to cover inventory repairs, then used another credit card to cover the first ones. They borrowed from friends with the kind of desperate confidence people use when they're too ashamed to admit they're borrowing, not bridging. They sold the nicer car. They listed wedding gifts online. They stopped coming to family events, which honestly was the first holiday season I remember enjoying the potato salad. Then one evening, my mother called and asked if I'd heard from my brother because he wasn't answering. I said no. She said his wife sounded strange in a text. My stomach dropped anyway, because when family chaos has been simmering for years, you start recognizing the smell before anything boils over. He showed up at my apartment the next afternoon alone. I opened the door expecting a random visit and instead got my brother standing there like somebody had let the air out of him. Same jacket he wore to work interviews, beard overgrown, eyes red, lips chapped. He asked if he could come in. My daughter was in the living room building a blanket cave and immediately yelled his name like he was still the fun uncle from before life got ugly. He hugged her so hard it made me nervous. We sat at my tiny kitchen table while the cheap fan in the window rattled like it was judging us. He kept rubbing his palms on his jeans. Finally, he said they were being evicted from their apartment. 4 months behind. The business was dead. They had gone back to old jobs, but the paychecks were already swallowed by debt. He said he knew I had every reason to say no, and then he asked if they could stay with me for a little while until they got stable. I actually asked where his wife was. He looked at the floor and said she was in the car because she was too ashamed to come in first. That almost made me laugh, and I don't mean because it was funny. I mean because there it was again, the weird little theater of my family where everybody else's feelings arrived first and mine had to wait politely in the hallway. I said if she wanted help, she could come upstairs and use her own voice. So she did, eventually. She came in with mascara tracks down her face and no trace of the polished woman who used to critique my life like she was grading homework. She apologized. Not elegantly, not perfectly, but directly enough that I believed she at least understood how bad things had gotten. She said she'd been arrogant. She said she'd said cruel things. She said she never thought they'd end up asking me for help. My brother cried again. My daughter, who of course sensed adult drama like weather, brought over a stuffed animal and offered it to my sister-in-law as if grief could be solved by a plush rabbit. I wish I could tell you I made them sweat. I didn't. I looked around my apartment, at the second bedroom I used for recording and occasional storage, at the stack of craft supplies by the couch, at my daughter's little shoes by the door, and I said yes. Temporary, I said. They both agreed so fast it was almost violent. Gratitude poured out of them in this dizzying rush. They promised they'd never forget it. They said I was saving them. My brother held my hand and said I was the only one who really came through. Even then, some ugly little voice in me thought, okay, but will you remember that when you're comfortable again? I hated that the voice existed. I also hated that it was right so often. Living with family only works when everybody is humble or rich, and we were neither. I moved my recording setup into a corner of my bedroom and gave them the second room. That meant my workday became a weird dance of whispering around naps, waiting for quiet, asking people not to slam doors, and recording cheerful scripts about customer care while resenting the fact that 3 adults were now sharing one bathroom and most of the emotional labor was somehow still mine. They both had jobs again. Every cent they made, according to them, went to debt and catching up on the bills they'd left bleeding behind. I believed that part. What I didn't enjoy was how quickly gratitude started growing opinions. At first, it was little things. My sister-in-law reorganized my kitchen to make it flow better. Translation. She moved my pans, spices, lunch containers, and coffee filters into places that made sense only to her. She bought discount labels and stuck them on my cabinets without asking. She commented on what time my daughter ate dinner. She suggested a stricter bedtime. She asked if screen time before school was maybe why she got distracted in class. Mind you, my kid was doing fine. Not perfect, because she was a child, and not a military recruit, but fine. It was like my sister-in-law couldn't stand being dependent unless she could still create a hierarchy somewhere, and the easiest target was my home. My brother mostly avoided conflict by being gone. Extra shifts, longer commutes, mysterious errands. He'd come home smelling like fast food in shame, kiss my daughter's head, thank me too quickly, and disappear into the guest room. Sometimes late at night, he'd sit in my kitchen while I edited audio and admit he felt like a failure. Those were the moments when he sounded like himself again. The brother who used to ask me how to fix his resume and whether a girl who corrected his grammar on dates was a red flag. He said his wife was trying her best. He said she was struggling with the humiliation of needing help. I said needing help doesn't make somebody cruel. He didn't argue. He just stared at the table. Money got tighter for me too, of course. I covered the bigger grocery runs because it was easier, and because they always seemed one paycheck away from disaster. I canceled a little weekend trip I'd planned with my daughter to a lake cabin 2 hours away because it felt obscene to spend on rest when 3 adults were eating out of one fridge and my electric bill had jumped from everybody charging devices and running fans. I didn't resent them every second. That's the thing. If I had, maybe I would have protected myself better. There were mornings when my sister-in-law packed my daughter's lunch because I was on a deadline. There were nights when my brother handled bath time and bedtime stories while I re-recorded a project with a last-minute script change. We had almost family moments that confused me. Movie nights on the couch, shared takeout, jokes about the neighbor's dramatic breakup. Those are dangerous moments, honestly. They make you think history is softening when really it's just napping. One night during dinner, my sister-in-law said, in this weirdly airy voice, that once they were back on their feet, they would obviously return to the kind of standard of living they were meant for. Meant for. I nearly choked on pasta. My daughter asked what standard meant. I said it meant your aunt was tired and talking nonsense. My sister-in-law smiled, but not kindly. My brother stared at his plate again. If I sound bitter about the plate thing, it's because a grown man can only investigate mashed potatoes so many times before it starts looking like a personality defect. Months passed like that. Awkwardly. Loudly. Expensively. Then one night, after my daughter finally went to sleep and the apartment was blessedly quiet except for my cheap desk fan clicking like loose bones, my brother sat across from me at the table and said he couldn't do his old job anymore. It paid too little. The manager treated him like he was disposable, and every morning he felt sick driving there. He said he knew he had no right to ask for more help. But did I know anybody? Anybody at all? Any client? Any contact? Anything better? I said maybe. I actually did know somebody. One of my regular clients ran a regional clothing company and sometimes needed junior administrative help because his business was growing faster than his systems. He trusted me because I always delivered on time, fixed mistakes without drama, and never pretended chaos was strategy. I told my brother I could ask for an interview. Nothing more. He looked so relieved I almost hated him a little for making me feel responsible again. My sister-in-law cried when he told her. This time, it wasn't humiliation crying. It was hopeful crying, which somehow landed differently. She thanked me like she'd finally recognized I was useful in a language she respected. She said maybe this was the turning point. My brother hugged me and said he'd never forget it. There it was again. Never forget. The phrase should have come with a warranty. I called my client the next morning from my parked car outside my daughter's school because I didn't want anyone overhearing me make a favor-sounding request. I kept it simple. I said my brother was reliable, organized, desperate to get out of a bad job, and capable if somebody gave him a shot. I did not say he had a talent for letting women insult me while pretending he was trapped by circumstances. My client laughed and said he trusted my judgment more than most resumes anyway. He agreed to interview him for an entry-level operations role. When I told my brother, he looked like somebody had opened a window in a burning room. The interview happened 3 days later. He borrowed one of my nicer folders because he didn't own anything that didn't still smell faintly like panic. He got the job by the end of the week. Junior role, modest pay, room to grow. Nothing glamorous but real. Stable. His wife hugged me so hard my shoulder popped. She said I had changed their lives. My brother kept saying thank you in this broken, stunned voice that made me feel good in a way I don't entirely trust in myself. Being needed can become its own addiction. He did well there. Better than I expected, honestly. He learned fast, showed up early, and actually seemed hungry in a useful way instead of the performative hustle he'd done during the business mess. Over the next several months, he got better at the work and more comfortable around the owner. Then he got a raise, then a better title. Not executive of the century stuff, just the kind of steady progress that can save a household if people stop trying to impress imaginary judges. Eventually, they moved out into a small apartment across town. I helped carry boxes because of course I did. My daughter cried because she'd gotten used to her uncle being there all the time. My sister-in-law walked through the new place talking about fresh starts and healthier energy and how quickly they'd recovered once they got the right opportunity. I noticed the wording, but I let it go. Again, she didn't mention who created that opportunity. My brother didn't either. At first, I told myself that gratitude doesn't always need a speech. Sometimes people thank you by doing better. But then family conversations started sounding weird. At lunch with my parents one Sunday, my brother talked about how hard he had worked to rebuild after the business failure. True. He talked about long hours, discipline, swallowing his pride, making the most of a second chance. Also true. He never once said how he got that second chance in the first place. My mother nodded like he'd pulled himself out of a flood with his teeth. My father said adversity builds character. I waited for the missing sentence. It never came. Afterward, I asked my brother privately why he hadn't mentioned the referral. He got embarrassed immediately, said he hated revisiting that period, Said he didn't want every conversation about his new job to include a reminder that he'd needed help. I said acknowledging reality isn't humiliation unless you're still lying to yourself. He asked me not to make it weird. I said it already was weird. He kissed my cheek like I was being dramatic and left before I could decide whether to be furious or just tired. Time passed. More promotions, better clothes, a nicer haircut, different posture. You could watch his self-image coming back in pieces. And right alongside it, my sister-in-law's old personality came strolling home like she'd just been on vacation. The little comments returned first. Then the distancing. Then the rewriting. I found out through a cousin that she had started telling people living with me had been complicated, which is a sly little word, isn't it? It can hide almost anything. Complicated, according to her, meant I liked reminding them they were in my space. Me asking them to clean the bathroom became me controlling the house. Me working around quiet hours became me treating them like children. Me covering groceries and utilities turned into me using money to feel superior. I actually sat in my car in a pharmacy lot and laughed when I first heard it, because I thought surely nobody would believe something that stupid. Then my mother called me that same week and said, maybe I should stop bringing up everything I did for them, because it made them uncomfortable. I said name one time I brought it up. She couldn't. She just said peace matters more than being right. That sentence explains half my life. My sister-in-law slid all the way back into her old self with almost admirable speed. At a cousin's birthday dinner, I heard her across the room telling one of my aunts that they had to get out of my place quickly because the environment wasn't healthy. She said I was intense. Said I kept score. Said I liked them depending on me because it let me play savior. The wild part was, she said all this while holding a slice of cake I'd helped pay for because I was the one who sent money when that cousin got laid off 2 months earlier. Family memory is so selective it should be illegal. When I confronted my brother by text, he called instead of replying, which he only did when he knew typed words might expose him later. He said his wife was just venting. I said venting isn't lying. He said maybe I had made them feel indebted sometimes. I nearly drove off the road. Indebted. They had been indebted. That wasn't a feeling problem. That was just math with emotions attached. He got irritated and said I was stuck in the past. I said the past seemed very alive for somebody using it to smear me. He ended the call with that wounded tone he used when he wanted to feel attacked instead of accountable. By then, well over a year had passed since they'd moved out, and my brother had stacked enough raises and steadier paychecks to start sounding like stability had always belonged to him. Around then, they started talking about buying a house. A modest little place in a suburb with older trees and manageable payments. Nothing huge. On paper, I was happy for them. Genuine. Or as genuinely as a person can be, while resenting the fact that the ladder they climbed kept getting painted to look self-built. My daughter was thrilled because she assumed a house meant weekend sleepovers and backyard barbecues, and her uncle pushing her on a swing. I let her imagine it because I still hadn't fully accepted what was happening. Some stupid piece of me thought blood would reassert itself. That gratitude might show up late, a little wrinkled but present. Then my mother called one afternoon asking what gift I planned to bring to their housewarming. I said, what housewarming? The silence on the line was so sharp I could hear her realize she'd said the quiet part too early. She stammered something about maybe the invitation hadn't reached me yet. I already knew. My whole body knew before my mind caught up. I asked when it was. She said Saturday. 3 days away. I thanked her in this very calm voice that meant danger, and hung up. I called my brother immediately. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed, like I'd interrupted a perfectly nice lie. I asked whether there was a reason I hadn't been invited to the party. He said, flat out, flat. That his wife didn't want tension in their new home. I said tension. You mean me? He said there was resentment on both sides and they wanted a peaceful, fresh start. I honestly laughed so hard I scared myself. Fresh start for whom? Certainly not for the person whose couch they had cried on. I asked if he had told people I wasn't invited. He said it wasn't anybody's business. I said it's definitely my business, if people think I chose not to come. He got cold then. Said he was tired of me acting like they owed me forever. There it was. The sentence underneath all the others. Not that they were grateful and ashamed, not that they valued me, but wanted distance. No, they were angry that help came with memory. My daughter heard enough of the call to understand we weren't included. She sat on the arm of the couch afterward and asked why her uncle didn't want us at his new house. I told her adults get weird when they're embarrassed. She asked if she had done something wrong at the wedding a long time ago. That nearly ended me. I said absolutely not. I said sometimes people decide to blame whoever saw them struggle, because it feels easier than feeling seen. She nodded like she understood, but she was little. So really, she just understood that people she loved were acting strange. For 2 straight days, I bounced between rage and humiliation. I cleaned too much. I checked the same email chain 4 times. I rehearsed speeches in the shower. I told myself to let it go because showing up uninvited is exactly the kind of thing people use later to call you unstable. Then I heard from an aunt that my sister-in-law had been telling people they bought the house without depending on anybody, and that they had rebuilt through pure discipline and faith. Pure discipline and faith. I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open and stared at the referral emails I still had from my client. Not because I save blackmail material, to be clear. I'm just freelance and disorganized in all the normal ways. So old threads pile up forever. I should have deleted them. Or maybe I shouldn't have. Depends who you ask. Saturday came and I spent the morning trying to be the kind of woman who rises above things. I folded laundry. I took my daughter to a discount store for poster board and glue sticks. I answered a client revision request. I even told myself out loud, in my own kitchen, that not every betrayal needs an audience. Then my aunt texted me a photo from the party. My parents smiling in the new living room. My brother holding a tray of drinks. My sister-in-law in a cream sweater that said effortless, but definitely took effort. Caption, so proud of these two for doing it all on their own. That's when I lost all interest in dignity. I didn't bring my daughter. I took her to a friend's apartment first and said I'd be back soon. I printed the email thread from my client because apparently I contain multitudes, one of them petty and office supply based. Then I drove to their new house with my hands shaking so badly I almost missed the turn. The place was nice. Fresh paint, little patch of yard, folding chairs out back, music playing low through a speaker. I stood on the porch hearing laughter inside and had one last sane thought, which was leave, get in the car, go home, eat cereal over the sink and let these people be awful without your participation. But then my mother opened the door because somebody else was arriving behind me, and her face when she saw me told me everything. She didn't look surprised that I was hurt. She looked inconvenienced that hurt had shown up in visible form. The room went quiet in that horrible social way, where nobody stops moving exactly. But all the movement becomes fake. My sister-in-law crossed the room so fast it would have been impressive if I liked her. She hissed that this wasn't the time. One of my aunts, already 2 drinks in and blessedly nosy, asked why on earth I hadn't been invited if I was here with a gift. I said because I wasn't invited. Loud enough, clean enough. The room shifted. My brother came over with the expression of a man who thinks reality should have stayed in the trunk. He told me we could talk outside. I said no, actually, we've done enough private conversations that end in public lies. My mother started saying my name like a warning siren. I didn't scream. That's the annoying part. I was calmer than everybody expected, which gave my words more weight than if I'd been sobbing. I said I didn't come to ruin their housewarming. I came because I was tired of hearing a fake version of my own life repeated back to me by people who had slept under my roof, eaten food I paid for, and built their recovery on help they now treated like contamination. My sister-in-law tried to cut in and say I was making everything about myself. I asked if she wanted me to go line by line. Then I did. I said when their business failed, they came to me on the edge of eviction. I said they lived in my apartment for months while I moved my job into my bedroom and carried the extra bills. I said I listened to their crying, their panic, their promises. I said when my brother couldn't stand his job and asked for another chance, I put my own professional reputation on the line and got him an interview with a client who trusted me. Then I held up the printed emails and said if anybody needed documentation because memory was suddenly fashionable, I had it. The room did that awful collective inhale people do when a secret turns physical. My brother looked sick. My sister-in-law went white first, then red. She said his growth at the company was his own. I said, of course it was. And getting through a door still matters when you didn't open it yourself. One of my cousins asked if this was true. My brother, after what felt like a century, said yes, but there is always a but when people want accountability diluted. He started saying he had worked hard. And I said nobody was denying that. I was denying the lie that they had done everything alone while painting me as controlling for not pretending amnesia was maturity. My mother snapped then. Not at them. At me. She said this was cruel and humiliating. I asked whether humiliation only counted when it happened in nice houses. My father told me to leave. My aunt muttered that maybe I should have been invited in the first place. Another relative said my brother should have acknowledged help with grace instead of making it a scandal. It turned into one of those family arguments where 10 people are talking and nobody is listening and everybody keeps choosing the version of the truth that protects their favorite person. My sister-in-law started crying hard, messy crying, and ran down the hall. My brother followed her without looking at me. That was the part that landed deepest, weirdly. Not the insults, not the exclusion, just him physically choosing her version again, in front of everybody, while my words were still hanging in the room like smoke. I left before anybody could reframe me in real time. I got back in my car, shut the door, and shook so hard I couldn't start the engine for a full minute. The fallout started before I even got home. My phone lit up at red lights, in parking lots, while I stood in line picking up my daughter. While I sat on the edge of her bed, later pretending I wasn't dissociating through bedtime stories about woodland animals with healthier boundaries than my relatives. Some texts said I was brave. Some said I was petty. My mother sent 3 messages in a row about how I had chosen spectacle over peace, which is rich coming from a woman who treated peace like a decorative throw pillow she only cared about when guests were over. My father sent exactly 1 line. You embarrassed your brother in his own home. Notice how nobody ever said my brother embarrassed himself by lying. Fascinating little loophole. My brother texted me the next morning. Not a call. Not even close. Just a long message about betrayal, how he never expected me to weaponize help, how I had humiliated his wife in front of family, how he needed distance for the foreseeable future. Distance for the foreseeable future is such therapy language nonsense when what you mean is, I'm mad you didn't stay quiet. He said he loved me, but couldn't have me in his life while I was committed to punishing him. I read that message sitting in my kitchen in yesterday's shirt while my coffee went cold and felt this weird split inside myself. One part of me wanted to defend every detail. The other part was so tired that all it could think was, wow, he really built himself a whole alternate universe and moved in. I wrote 12 replies in my head and sent none of them, which, for me, counts as sainthood. The family group chat went weird immediately. My cousin tried posting neutral things like recipes and school photos. My mother responded to everybody except me. My aunt, bless her messy heart, privately told me half the family thought I had every right to expose them, and the other half thought I had ruined a special milestone out of jealousy. Jealousy of what, exactly, I'm still not clear on. Their mortgage? Their crown of selective memory? My daughter asked why her grandparents weren't answering the thank you drawing she'd sent the week before. I said grown-ups can act childish when they feel guilty. She said that sounded backwards. I said yes, it does. A few weeks later, it was my daughter's birthday. I invited everybody anyway because some stubborn part of me still believed adults should have to actively choose being cruel, not just drift into it. None of them came. Not my parents, not my brother, not his wife, not even a half-hearted excuse. My daughter wore a paper tiara from the party store and tried to pretend she wasn't checking the door every time footsteps passed in the hall. That image will stay in my body forever, I think. Her trying to smile through face paint while waiting for people who had already decided she was collateral damage. Friends came. 2 of my neighbors came. A mom from school brought her son and extra juice boxes. My regular client, the one who had hired my brother, stopped by with a gift bag for my daughter because he happened to be nearby and because he is, annoyingly, one of the more decent men I've known. We stood by the kitchen counter while kids chased balloons through the living room, and he asked how my brother was doing because things had seemed off at work lately. He didn't go into details, but I could tell from his tone that whatever was happening wasn't sitting well with him. I didn't dump the full family drama on him. I just said things were tense. He looked at me for a second in that careful business owner way and then said, very quietly, that if my brother expected another rescue, it wasn't coming from the company. He had earned the job originally because of me, yes, but he had kept it by his own work until recently. Lately, though, he was coasting and resentful and acting entitled when corrected. I said I understood, and I did, more than I wanted to. The sad part is I still felt sick hearing it, because no matter how angry I was, some piece of my brain still heard he is in trouble and translated it into, go help him. I didn't. But the reflex was there. That made me feel almost as pathetic as the family group chat did. 3 weeks after the birthday party, my brother lost his job. I didn't hear it from him first, of course. I heard it through my mother, who called in that breathless tone she used when she wanted to sound concerned, but was actually preparing a charge sheet. She said the company had let him go, and his wife was devastated, and this was a terrible time for the family, and she hoped I was happy. I asked if she truly believed I had the power to make a grown man ignore repeated warnings at work. She said influence comes in many forms. That was her answer whenever she didn't have facts, just a mood and a target. I called my client after that, mostly because I needed to hear the timeline from somebody who wasn't narrating through martyrdom. He was gentle about it, said he'd given my brother more than one chance, but things had been slipping for a while and the decision hadn't been sudden. He didn't dump all the details on me, but I could read between the lines. He said he regretted how it would affect me personally, but the decision had been overdue. I thanked him for being honest. Then I sat in my car outside a pet store for 10 minutes staring at a discount bird feeder like it had answers. That evening, my brother showed up at my apartment without warning. He pounded on the door hard enough to scare my daughter. I told her to go to her room and turn up her movie. Then I opened the door, and there he was, face flushed, breathing like he'd run up the stairs, fueled entirely by self-pity. He didn't say hello, didn't ask if I had a minute. He stormed in and accused me of poisoning his boss against him. He said ever since the housewarming things had shifted. He said I had probably told stories, made little comments, turned people against him. He said I always needed to be the injured one. I let him talk longer than he deserved because I was curious how far he would take the fantasy. Turns out, very far. When he finally paused, I asked one question. Did you come to your niece's birthday? He blinked like I'd changed languages. I asked again. Did you come? Did you call? Did you text? Did you send a card? Anything. He started saying that was different. I said no, actually it wasn't. It was exactly the same pattern. He wanted grace, support, family, and rescue on demand, while giving nothing back unless it cost him nothing socially. He said I was cruel. I said he was spoiled. He said I enjoyed seeing him struggle. I laughed right in his face, which wasn't my best moment, but also not my worst. I said if I enjoyed that, I'd never have helped him the first time. He switched tactics then, which is another family habit I know by heart. When anger stops working, pivot to guilt. He said I knew how hard things had been. He said his wife was under unbearable stress. He said losing the job could cost them the house if things spiraled. Then, and this was the part that finally cured something in me, he said I could fix this if I wanted to. I could call my client and smooth it over. Just talk to him. Just explain. Just get him another chance. As if I were a faucet he could turn on whenever his life got dry. I told him no. Not dramatic no. Not screaming no. Just the kind of flat, adult no that doesn't leave room for mishearing. I said I wasn't risking my credibility again for someone who erased my help when it benefited him and blamed me when consequences arrived. I said if he had spent half the energy owning his choices that he spent rewriting them, maybe he wouldn't be standing in my living room begging the person he claimed had ruined him. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Maybe I had, emotionally speaking. Then he called me selfish. I almost admired the nerve. He kept pushing. That's the thing about people who've been rescued more than once. They start treating access like entitlement. My brother said family was supposed to show up even when things were ugly. I said family was also supposed to tell the truth when it mattered. He said I was punishing him over pride. I said no, I was stepping out of a cycle where his pride kept becoming my emergency. Then he did what I should have expected from the beginning. He brought up childhood. Said I always thought I was better than everyone because I was the responsible one. Said I liked having stories where he was the screw-up and I was the savior. Hearing that from him felt like swallowing broken glass, because if anyone had been assigned a role in our family, it was him as the protected one and me as the one who could handle more. I didn't choose that. I survived it. I told him that when we were kids, he got new shoes while I wore patched uniforms. He rolled his eyes like I was dragging out ancient trivia. I said that's exactly the point. It was never ancient to me because the pattern never stopped. He got defended, explained, softened. I got praised for being strong whenever somebody needed an excuse not to show up for me. My mother called me independent when what she meant was conveniently neglected. My father said I was mature when what he meant was easier to disappoint. He told me I was being dramatic because I'd done okay in life, as if making something out of scraps cancels the fact that all you were given was scraps. At that point, my daughter wandered into the hall because kids always appear at the exact wrong moment, like tiny emotional deer. She looked from me to him and asked if he was yelling. He changed his face instantly, softened his voice. Said no, sweetheart. Adults were just talking. Something inside me went solid then, because he could modulate for her. He could choose gentleness when he wanted to. He just hadn't chosen it for me in years. I told him it was time to leave. He said not until I agreed to call his former boss. I walked to the door and opened it. He stood there for a second, breathing hard, waiting for me to cave the way I always used to after tears or history or guilt. I didn't. Finally, he left, muttering that I would regret turning my back on him. I locked the door so fast I almost broke the chain. My mother called 20 minutes later, which told me he'd gone straight downstairs and started narrating. She said my brother was in crisis, and whatever our issues were, couldn't I be the bigger person? That phrase. The bigger person is always the one expected to choke quietly on other people's choices. I told her being the bigger person had already cost me money, time, sleep, respect, and now my daughter's peace. She said children shouldn't be kept from family over adult disagreements. I said then maybe adults shouldn't weaponize children by disappearing when they're angry at somebody else. My father got on the phone after that and said enough was enough, that I had become bitter and unforgiving. I said no, I'd become observant. He told me blood matters. I said then why didn't it matter when I was the one being humiliated for years? He had no answer except anger. My mother started crying in the background. Real crying, or maybe strategic crying, hard to tell with her. Suddenly I felt ancient, tired in the bones, like I could already see the next 10 years if I stayed available. Another crisis, another rescue request, another lie, another lecture about grace. So I said something I'd never said to either of my parents before. I said if their version of family required me to accept disrespect indefinitely, then they could keep that version without me. And then I hung up. My hand shook for an hour after, but the apartment felt oddly clear, like somebody had opened a window after years of burnt food and old smoke. The next week was all logistics and emotional whiplash. I blocked my brother first, not out of rage exactly, though rage was definitely present and wearing boots. I blocked him because I know how he argues. He circles, he reframes, he sends late-night paragraphs that turn your certainty into homework. I blocked my mother 2 days later after she left a voice message saying she'd forgive my outburst if I called my brother and apologized for escalating things at the housewarming. Forgive my outburst. As if we'd all just had a noisy brunch disagreement and not years of distortion with a side of disrespect. I left my father unblocked for another day out of some leftover daughterly superstition. Then he sent a message about how bitterness poisons a woman's home. Blocked. A few relatives kept reaching out privately. My aunt said she understood why I'd snapped, though she wished it hadn't happened at a party. My cousin said everybody knew my sister-in-law had a mouth on her, but people tolerated it because confronting her was exhausting. That sentence actually helped me. Not because it excused anything, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. I hadn't imagined the pattern. I had just been the one expected to absorb the cost of naming it. My daughter noticed the quiet almost immediately. Kids track absence like weather pressure. She asked why Grandpa hadn't called after she lost her second tooth. She asked whether her uncle still liked the drawing she made him of our family at the park, the one where she accidentally gave him green eyebrows because the marker slipped. I told her sometimes adults make bad choices when they feel ashamed, and it can take them a long time to do better. She asked if that meant we were mad forever. I said I didn't know about forever. I only knew I wasn't going to keep opening the door for people who walked in and wiped their feet on us. Work got busier, which helped. Busy is not healing, but it can at least keep you from rereading old text threads at 1 a.m. I booked a campaign for a chain of urgent care clinics, a batch of training modules for a roofing company, and a holiday radio spot so aggressively cheerful it made me want to chew drywall. Money wasn't amazing, but it was steady. I rearranged the second bedroom back into a proper studio and let my daughter help choose a new rug for the floor. She picked one with little suns on it. Said the room looked happier now. I didn't tell her it felt happier because it no longer smelled faintly like other people's crisis. The weirdest part was how grief kept sneaking in sideways. Not grief for the version of my brother who existed now. That man felt like a stranger in my hallway. I grieved the old one. The one who sat on my kitchen counter eating cereal out of the box and asking if a breakup text sounded too formal. The one who bought my daughter toy dinosaurs from gas stations because he couldn't resist her tiny, delighted face. Losing somebody who is still technically alive is obnoxious that way. There's no casserole for it. People just expect you to move on because nobody died, and meanwhile something absolutely did. A month after the job loss, I heard from my aunt that my brother and his wife were behind on their mortgage already, and trying to blame the firing on family interference. I laughed until I got angry and then got quiet, because even from a distance, they were still using me as insulation. If bad things happened, I was the villain. If good things happened, I was erased. Convenient arrangement. Terrible relationship. So I stopped tracking them. Not instantly, not heroically, more like a recovering idiot. I'd think about checking. I'd feel that little itch. Then I'd remember my daughter checking the front door on her birthday, and the urge would die on its own. The holidays were rough in stupid little ways. Not movie scene rough. No sobbing in snow, no dramatic knocks at the door. Just small absences stacked on top of each other until they got heavy. I bought gifts for fewer people. My daughter asked fewer hopeful questions. The family group chat. which I could technically still see through my tablet because I hadn't logged out there yet, filled with photos I wasn't in. My parents at my brother's house. My mother holding a pie dish like she personally invented forgiveness. Somebody's caption about family being everything. I stared at that one long enough to give myself a headache. I almost replied. God, I almost replied. Something sharp and satisfying and impossible to take back. Instead, I logged out and handed my tablet to my daughter so she could watch a cartoon while I wrapped presents in the kitchen and muttered swear words into tape. Progress, honestly. Christmas morning in our apartment ended up being smaller and better than I expected. Pancakes from a box mix, mismatched pajamas, my daughter yelling over a secondhand dollhouse like we'd won the lottery. There was grief in it. Yes. There was also relief. Nobody judging the wrapping paper. Nobody correcting my parenting. Nobody making my home feel like a waiting room for approval. I kept noticing how calm I felt. And every time I noticed it, I got mad all over again that chaos had ever been normalized enough for calm to surprise me. A week later, I ran into my mother outside a pharmacy. 88. She looked older. That's not me being poetic. She literally looked older. More tired around the mouth. She froze when she saw me, then tried to smile with the carefulness of someone approaching a skittish animal. We stood there by the automatic doors with carts rattling past us and people carrying cough drops and toilet paper like life wasn't splitting quietly in public. She asked how my daughter was. I said she was fine. She asked how work was. I said busy. Then she sighed and said families shouldn't stay broken over pride. I asked whose pride. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said my brother was struggling, my sister-in-law was stressed, and my father hated the distance. I said my daughter hated it too, especially on her birthday, but nobody seemed too troubled then. My mother flinched, which at least told me the point landed somewhere. She said I had to understand how hard it was for my brother to feel judged. I actually laughed, which was maybe rude in front of the vitamin display. But come on. I said he wasn't allergic to judgment. He was allergic to being the one who got it. Then she cried. Real tears this time, I think. She said she missed me. And there it was, the part that almost got me, because I missed having a mother too. Not the one I actually had, maybe, but the imaginary upgraded edition in my head. The one who would have protected me when people spoke to me with contempt. The one who would have shown up for my little girl because children are not bargaining chips. I stood there wanting to comfort her and wanting to scream, which is a very daughter feeling. I told her missing me wasn't the same as repairing what she helped damage. She asked what I wanted from her. That's when I knew nothing had changed. Because if she didn't know by then, after all of it, then any answer I gave would just become another hoop for me to jump through. So I said I wanted space. Consistent space. Not a dramatic reunion. Not a forced holiday dinner. Not a speech about unity. Just distance long enough for me to stop bracing every time my phone lit up. She nodded like she'd been handed something cruel. Maybe to her she had. Then she said she loved me. I said okay. Not because I didn't believe it at all, but because love without protection had stopped meaning very much to me. I drove home shaking anyway. Spring came without permission the way it always does. All sudden pollen and school forms and the feeling that life has moved on while you're still arguing with old ghosts. My daughter got taller. I got better at saying no without an essay attached. That alone probably saved me several years of stress-related skin issues. Then my aunt called and said my brother wanted to send over some birthday money for my daughter. Months late. Through her. Not to see her. Not to apologize. Just money. Like he was paying off a parking ticket and hoping the clerk would stamp the file closed. I said no. My aunt, who genuinely meant well, said maybe it was his awkward way of trying. I said trying would look like accountability, not an envelope with folded bills and no explanation. She went quiet and then, because she knows me, admitted I was probably right. That night, I thought about him longer than I wanted to. I thought about how easy it would have been to tell myself the money meant something good. Progress. Remorse. Softening. But I know my brother. Money would have let him feel generous without ever saying the words that mattered. I excluded you. I lied about you. I let my wife disrespect you. I let my niece pay for anger that wasn't hers. Without those words, cash was just another shortcut around discomfort. So I said no to the money and yes to my own peace. And I wish I could claim it felt noble. Mostly it felt sad. My daughter asked why we were donating some old toys that weekend, and I told her, because homes work better when they aren't stuffed with things nobody uses. Halfway through the sentence, I realized I wasn't talking only about toys. By early summer, the silence had become a routine instead of an emergency. That was new. I stopped checking shared family updates through other people. I stopped rehearsing future confrontations in the shower. My daughter stopped asking whether her uncle might come by one day, maybe. Kids are resilient, which is another beautiful sentence people use to hide how often children have to adapt to grown people's failures. She still drew our family and school projects, but now it was mostly me, her, and occasionally the neighbor's dog if he'd been around that week. Work got better too. Not magically, not overnight, but steadily. I raised my rates with 2 long-term clients, and nobody died. I redid my demo reel. I bought a better microphone after months of talking myself out of it. One evening, after finishing a batch of corporate narration that made me want to fling myself into traffic, I stood in the doorway of my little studio and felt proud in a clean way I hadn't in a while. Not because anybody approved, not because I'd won some moral contest, just because this life, the one people kept treating as flimsy, had held. It held through bills, through single motherhood, through freelancing, through family mess, through other people's collapse, through my own stupidity in thinking love automatically made people decent. I didn't become softer about what happened, I became clearer. That's different. Clear enough to know that if somebody only values your help when it's private and resents it when it's true, they don't want relationship. They want access. At the end of summer, I got one last message from an unknown number while I was waiting in the school pickup line. It was my brother. Short, no drama. He said he knew I had blocked him. He said he was using a borrowed phone because he wanted to say he was sorry for how things got out of hand and that maybe someday we could start over. How things got out of hand. I stared at that sentence while minivans crawled forward and somebody behind me tapped their horn because I hadn't moved fast enough. I could have answered. I could have asked what exactly he meant. I could have dragged out a confession 1 teaspoon at a time. Years ago, I would have. I would have taken that crumb and baked a whole fantasy out of it. But sitting there with construction paper on the passenger seat and my daughter's backpack waiting to be tossed in the back, I realized I didn't want another conversation built out of half-ownership and convenient vagueness. So I wrote back one line. I said starting over only works when people are honest about where they ended. Then I blocked that number too. Maybe that sounds harsh, maybe it was. I don't really care anymore. Some endings aren't dramatic. They don't come with courtroom speeches or family revelations or a satisfying slow clap from the universe. Sometimes it's just a woman in a pickup line deciding she is done carrying everybody else's version of events on top of her own groceries, deadlines, parenting, and nerves. Sometimes it's realizing that love can be real and still not be enough to keep somebody close. Sometimes the cleanest thing you can do is stop volunteering to be the bridge people use while complaining about the view. I picked up my daughter a minute later. She climbed into the car talking a mile a minute about recess drama and a class pet that smelled weird, and whether we could have breakfast for dinner. I said yes, absolutely. Breakfast for dinner sounded perfect. Then I drove us home to our loud little apartment, to the studio with the sun rug, to the life that kept being called unstable by people who couldn't even hold on to their own stories without my help. And for once, instead of replaying what I should have said or done or forgiven, I just listened to her talk and took the next turn when it came.